Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the NDBI Navigator Narratives, this little informal conversational style podcast where I get to talk with community practitioners and researchers about the incredible work that they are doing within the NDBI community. And I am incredibly excited to get to introduce you all to Tamara Kasper today, who's a speech language pathologist and a board certified behavior analyst. Tamara, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, Dr. Jamie, thank you for this opportunity. It is truly an honor to have an opportunity to talk publicly with you. I know we've had our private conversations, but I so respect you and your work. And it's a thrill to me to talk about NDBIs with you and how it's influenced my life and the lives of the kids and the staff that I interact with. So thank you so much for this
Oh,
opportunity.
ditto, right back at you. I have this love fest going on with you and everything that you do personally and professionally. And I just feel like the stars have aligned, and I'm so excited to get to know you and to have had the opportunity to have you come and help my little guy with some of his speech needs. So, before we get into that, can you tell everyone a little bit more about all of the work you've been doing for the past X amount of years? It's
Yeah,
incredible.
well, when you get to my age, that ends up being kind of a long history. I am a dually certified speech language pathologist and board certified behavior analyst, as you noted. So part of that involved that I was a speech pathologist for about 10 years before I became a behavior analyst. And speech pathology really is grounded in a developmental framework. We study a lot about play. And I was lucky enough in my actually very first experience with a child with autism that where I was an instructor as a junior in college to work with a cognitive psychologist who was an expert in play. And he's still one of my best friends today. So that's like 38 years later. I had lunch with him last Friday.
Oh,
So he taught me a lot about play. And he was really a proponent of project play and also a proponent of Dr. Stanley Greenspan, which is not an evidence-based approach. I want to make that clear. I don't practice the DIR floor time approach. But I felt like that framework really allowed me to understand a lot of the critical components that are a part of NDBIs. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. But in terms of my background, so here I was a speech pathologist. I first worked at a residential facility for kids with emotional disturbances. So these were kids who had significant behavioral issues. There was a great team approach there with OT, speech, less social work, psychology, all working with these kids. And it was also a baptism by fire into how to deal with problem behavior and the functions of problem behavior and what does a well-developed behavior intervention plan look like. And so when I left there and moved to a pediatric clinic and a school, which was my next kind of combination. I was like now considered like the behavioral expert, which is laughable at 3 years of experience. And also because I had three kids with autism on my caseload, I was considered the autism expert. And so from that point on, like that's what my caseload was developed around was about kids that had significant communication and behavioral issues. And not surprisingly, many of those kids were later diagnosed or had a diagnosis of autism. And when you're working with kids that have significant behavioral challenges, they shape your behavior into learning how to use motivation to reach your goals. Like there's no way to work with those kind of kids without looking really carefully about what motivates them and how you can use construct activities surrounding what motivates them to improve the outcomes for them. So, I spent 36 years, from that point, like really specializing in working with kids with behavioral challenges and motivational challenges. And of course, why wouldn't you work in natural settings surrounding items and activities that they enjoy and love? Why wouldn't you build and construct your goals around those types of activities? And so I think as much as I've tried to learn about NDBIs through, taking the Early Start Denver coursework or Project Impact or learning about pivotal response training or going to continuing education about that, um, it was also the kids that shaped my behavior, right? So it was like this combination of a top-down and bottom-up approach that led me to become a better clinician in terms of understanding how the use of play and play activities can really influence outcomes. And as part of that, then I learned a lot about conditioning social stimuli, eye gaze, my voice, my gestures as attention worthy, right? In ABA, we would call that an SD, right? Kids need to pay attention to me because when they do, then I'm providing information that helps fuel their interest. And that those same social stimuli, my voice, my pat on the back, tousling their hair, throwing them up in the air, all of that functions to reinforce the behaviors that preceded that. And so if you're working with someone who has a significant challenge both in motivation and speech production or communication, then you have to be an expert in like manipulating motivational variables. And I was lucky enough early in my career. So I was working at that pediatric clinic, as I mentioned, and then one of the kids on my caseload was one of the first kids in my state to receive services through a Lovaas replication site. And I was like very skeptical about this because the university I went to did not value behavior analysis at that time. And I'm like, I'm going to go to this workshop. And it ended up being led by Glenn Sallows, who was the author of um, one of the replication studies of Dr. Lovaas's work. And in 3 days, they taught that kid more than I had taught him in 3 months. And I thought, like, I've got to learn more about this. And through that relationship, I actually became a consultant to that Lovaas replication site. But all my recommendations were like usually surrounding how to use motivation, how to use play. And then I met Dr. Carbone, who was my mentor then to become a behavior analyst. And if you know anything about Vince, like his whole the first half of his intro workshop is about why we need to like use motivation to create willing learners, to have kids that come to us willingly who want to engage and interact with us. And so I feel like I had this like almost synchronistic like lineup of opportunities to learn about how to really work with kids that have the most significant challenges and how to build their ability to communicate, build the persistence and resilience that they need and curiosity, as we talked about earlier, to like have a reason to communicate and then have the persistence to withstand a number of vocal training trials it might take in order to acquire a certain topography of speech, right, to improve their articulation, their speech clarity, or to learn how to use a multi-step communication system like picture exchange or AAC device, like whatever it is that's going to be the best for that fit for that child. But you need that motivation and that resilience in order to do that. And NDBIs is how you build that. That's how you get there, right? And I felt so strongly about this, right? So I worked under Vince's tutelage for about 5 years and then really wanted to start my own clinic in Wisconsin. And the law didn't permit it. So I worked with the local legislature. And it was actually one of my legislators that wrote the initial law that allowed or amendment that allowed us to be qualified supervising providers as behavior analysts in Wisconsin. And so then I started my own clinic and ran that clinic successfully. Often, we had kids that came to my clinic who had been unsuccessful in other clinics in my region and worked with those kids and had a really good success rate of building good communication skills and maybe not best outcome kids, but they were kids who had great outcomes because they were happy, they were interactive, they were communicating, and their parents were really pleased with them as full, vibrant members of their family. And then worked with Nancy Kaufman, refined some of those procedures or specialized those for kids with autism, all based on, again, looking at what motivates kids, right? So the kits that I made with Nancy were all about reinforcing items and activities.
Yep.
And then my latest thing after selling my company to a big company and working for that company, Caravel, for a number of years, which was really enjoyable also and taught me a lot about big business, is that I co-founded another company, Bridgify, with Dr. Lilith Reuter Yule. And I still continue to contribute to that company. But the goal there is, again, taking what we've learned over all these years, putting it in little small tools, packageable tools that people can implement, can use the next day in their therapy session, in their parent training session, however, that, to eh, make their job easier as we're trying to implement naturalistic developmental behavioral intervention and other speech strategies that I've developed along the way.
I
So
know.
that's kind of my journey. I mean, that's 36
That's
years.
incredible. I love it. I feel like my journey kind of mimics yours, where it was a UCLA card site consultant that came out, got into it, kind of learned about it. Then I went to work for Dr. Partington, and it was all about the demand and the motivation, getting into verbal behavior and net. And then I just kind of went into the NDBI arena. So I feel very similar to you in your journey of getting to learn how to help support kiddos and shape behaviors. Is kind of requires us to really dive a little deeper and think a little bit more about what is motivating to somebody? What's that interest sensory profile? What captures their attention? And how do we then, like you said, package that in a way where we can start working on goals that are going to be meaningful, valid, that matter for those kiddos? And I want to circle back to some of the stuff that you have with Nancy Kaufman, because we used to use this in my clinic and they were incredible. The K and K, they've been renamed, right?
Right, it's sign and select to talk now. Yeah.
Talk
Yeah,
about
it just came out a
that.
couple of months ago. No, and I'm really proud of this because what we try to do before, like in my work with Dr. Carbone, I was a little bit tribalistic, I'm going to say, and we use sign language mainly as our springboard to speech. So that was our AAC that we taught was sign language. And so at that time, then I created with Nancy sign to talk, which was using sign language again as a springboard to teach manding and then shaping vocalizations within the context of manding, and also through verbal imitation or COIC training trials during structured teaching. So it had this system that anyone could follow, that a behavior analyst could follow, that a parent could follow, tried to make it a little clearer and simpler for people to follow. And I now am proud that we took a look at all the more recent literature and what we know about speech generating devices or picture exchange, and what can we do within those contexts using time delay and other procedures to get speech rolling and then shaping it through those same customized procedures, really based on Nancy's work, the KSLP work that she has so elegantly described and sequenced. So yeah,
I'm
I'm proud of that work, and thanks for bringing that up. And really,
going to link it.
yeah, we should link it because even
You have one
even
behind
for
you.
kids who are vocal learners, like even if they're just shaping a few pieces of their articulation, like you can use those kits and the pictures are great. There's multiple exemplars. They're like hundreds of cards that are actions and objects, toys, activities that are meaningful to many children, to many kids with autism. I know Nancy's like, can we make a kit of things that typically autistic kids like to play with? And I'm like, no. And she's like, what do you mean no? And I'm like, it's really individualized. Everyone has something different. Someone might like marshmallows. The next person likes spinning a top. The next person is really interested in smelling your hair. Like it's very, very unique. And she said, but could you come up with a couple hundred that a lot of kids would like? And I'm like, okay. So I surveyed a bunch of clinics, and that's how we got the list of the
Oh,
items
oh
that
my
we
God.
used and the actions. Yeah.
See them on the table behind you over there. I think I see them over there.
Oh,
I just
yep, there they
love
are.
them. I just love them because on the front is that really colorful card that's so visually, yeah, hold one up if you can, because I don't know if people have seen
Yeah.
them.
Yes, because you know what one of my students, actually the parent, like said to me, "Oh, my child calls these the cool cards." And
I
I'm
think
like,
we
"The
all
cool
hold
cards." And they're like, "Yeah, who gets to look at a picture of Cheetos that's that beautiful and vibrant, or like chicken nuggets?" And it's not all foods. There's like toys, there's activities, actions, there's all kinds of things in here. But things that what's on the back are like the signs for the item still if someone's using sign language, and then those successive approximations to the target where you can help guide someone through the steps they might need in order to learn to say produce that word. And like in the manual that comes with this, the 50-page manual talks about the research, why we do this. It also teaches you how you can cross out some of these. You might not have to use all of these approximations, and there's little cheat notes here on the bottom for behavior analysts. So I think we've tried to make it as user friendly as possible
Yeah,
for people to be able to use. And if you don't have a speech pathologist you're collaborating, or if you do, right, they'll help you with target selection. It
yep,
helps you like understand what's the developmentally appropriate substitution, that a T for a CH is a great error for someone to have. Like it helps you understand some of that.
it does.
And that also, if people are interested in learning more about that, I have a course called the Speech Super Clinician, and it's designed for BCBAs or speech pathologists, who want to learn more about how you can combine like great aspects of speech pathology and behavior analysis to shape speech production. And it includes these cards and then the strategies we used with your son, like phonetic hand cues, like
Yeah.
to help someone learn to use a new sound. And if they have it in their repertoire, but it's weak, then we can use that hand cue to help them use it in all different words while we're playing, while we're engaging, or in structure teaching, either way. So those are the things that I hope people will be able to use with their ABA teams as a family in whatever capacity that their child's receiving intervention, that by trainings and those tools are something they can feel like they can use, that it's simple enough that you can implement it, that it's procedural enough that you know what to do.
Yes, that's one of the strengths I feel like you bring to both fields. The work that you're doing with Bridgify and the stuff that you have with Nancy Kaufman. We used to use these little, and we'd flag whatever the word tail was, and we'd move it up, and we'd have a date on it. And it was just so cool. As my clinic didn't have an SLP on site, we co-consulted with one, and those, like you said, so procedural, so systematic. We knew how to be able to support that child's communication and their equi repertoires with that without having that expertise. So some of the work that you're doing with Bridgify, same thing. You're giving people the knowledge and the skills to learn how to do this in a way that is manageable and that they can help support without feeling lost in it. And I think that's a big thing missing from our field. We get into like, oh, here's what it is. Yeah. How do you do it is a different scenario. Or like your phonetic hand cues, which again are incredible. And we used them when you came in to do an intensive with our little guy here in Iowa, Liam, and we were talking before we came on the recording, and I was just giggling when I was texting you when you were in town that when he would go to bed after we had worked with him all day, he'd be talking in his sleep, making the sounds. And I was sharing with him before we came on some CH sounds for watch, and he wants me to watch it. Now he starts air talking to get my attention. It's just hilarious how ingrained over a 3 day, do we have 3 days together?
Yeah, we did 3 days. Yeah. No, and I think that short-term intensive treatment model is like completely underestimated. I mean, there is research about using short-term intensive treatment for speech pathology and for AAC. And I'm a big believer because I think if you have someone very skilled and you're very skilled, and together the two of us, we had the motivational variables under control. And we had we knew what our targets were for speech. And together we like tuned our ear to be able to hear what was the perfect one, what was the better one, and we could use that to really shape within those couple of days. He was producing it accurately by the end of the 3 days. And then once you have that and you've connected it to a hand cue, the
Yep.
generalization across contexts, environments, different words, that part's relatively easy. It's that initial getting it set up. And so that is what one of my passions. That's something I really enjoy doing, is just stepping in, doing some short-term intervention like that, especially if you have a skilled parent or a team who's willing to learn, and like, just here we go. And then you can step back for a couple of months and the progress just keeps duplicating based on that. I don't know if Mark Sundberg would say this is a behavioral cusp, but in its effect, like its snowballing effect on the speech of the child, I feel like maybe we could look at it that way, that it's this really big jump start to improving speech clarity and generalization. I just like I mean, I think it's really inspirational to like see that kind of change in a short period of time.
Under the right conditions, working on the right targets, and really just circling back to that motivation, kind of what shaped your behavior across all of these incredible decades of looking at if we want a child to communicate and we want them to tell us something or ask for something, kind of thinking socially mediated, they have to have a want or a desire or a need to do so. And so one of the things that I love about the K and K cards again are that they are interesting things that we could use as a way to kind of scaffold out some support, or the intensive that you do, again, focusing on that was such a very different style of speech therapy for Liam. It was not at a table with a box of cards. It was in the natural environment, playing picnic on the couch outside, whatever it was that he wanted to do, you just leaned into that. And that is where I think that rapid acceleration of his speech production came because he was so motivated by the way you had set up the environment, just like we do in NDBI.
Well, you were a big help with that because he already had great play skills, right, coming in. And he was ready to move to the next level in terms of leveling up, maybe not the complexity of his play, but he was so interested and engaged that when you gave him something interesting, he could then again withstand like how many times he might have to try to say a word to get it correct. And then our ability to say, we're going to reinforce this middle of the road sound, and now we're going to reinforce the perfect sound. And so the fact that he starts recognizing that,
Right?
because when we talk about the development of speech, right, the kind of four things, socially mediated positive, socially mediated negative, right? I say it right, I get reinforced. Um, I say it right, something bad that goes away, but also automatic reinforcement. I say it right, it sounds right.
Yep.
Like that part I think what was cool, that automatic reinforcement and parity, right? That him then striving to try and make it sound right, to correct on his own, to use the hand cue to help facilitate the correct production himself. That's the stuff that, like, hey, if you can crack that out in 24 hours of therapy over a weekend, that's pretty awesome. And no way can you do 24 hours of at the table drill. Like that's not even a thought, right? So of course we're going to move across context and across different interests and figure out a way to work these in. And what I loved was, like, I left, and then you're sending me a video of how you now come up with sink or swim as your game that you're going to play, surrounding your sink in your kitchen, where you're throwing objects into the water and then working on these different sounds that we had been targeting, and that you could come up like this with these activities.
Yeah.
So not all parents are going to be skilled NDBI implementers like you, but I think through multiple exemplar training, like you and I can show parents,
Yeah.
even within one session, how you can shift your gears in each activity that the child is showing interest in, and how you can incorporate your goals into that. And they don't have to be as big of experts as us to make good progress, right? And so this is, I think, one of the things that people are sometimes, I'm going to say the word afraid, but like are a little reluctant perhaps to try to go to NDBIs, is they feel like it's not like procedural enough. But we were procedural.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
We were
Replicatable, can
procedural,
write it
right?
down.
Yeah.
Systematic shaping, differential reinforcement. Yes, everything that we were doing from that science of ABA, that pulls through. I think it's the context and the focus within NDBIs where I think people kind of drift off and get a little, I don't want to say uncomfortable or reluctant, like you said, like we got to follow this. If it developmentally doesn't make sense, no, you don't. You got to do what's best for that child with their development, meeting them where they're at, not where you want them to be. That's the goal that we're going to try to get to. But that motivation and social attention is how you keep them persisting and keep them engaged. You're not going to go anywhere without motivation or engagement, except the place where you have all the extra prompts and things that don't generalize, right? I call it like the dark land over there. We don't want to go there. So I think it is really important, and NDBIs do have a lot of procedural
They
elements.
do. They definitely do. And when you think about prompt dependency, right? One thing that Vince like ingrained in me always is there's three reasons for prompt dependency, Tammy, right? Lack of sufficient training trials. And if you don't have someone who's motivated and persistent, you're not going to get enough training trials.
Correct.
Failure to establish motivation.
Big one.
And then failure to prompt fade. And how can you prompt fade if you don't have sufficient training trials to fade your prompts, right? And like when people say things like he likes the prompts or he's prompt dependent, I'm like, let's shift that back. Like that's about us. That's about
Not
our
really.
teaching. This isn't someone liking prompts. This is someone who gets reinforced on a prompted trial. This is a science. This is not like something within the child. That was I think my biggest epiphany in moving from a speech pathologist to a behavior analyst was mm, motivation doesn't exist within the child.
Mm,
Motivation exists within how we organize their environment
love it.
based on what we've observed about their inclinations, what they seek out on their own. And so I think that was so powerful for me that once I learned that, and that was in Vince's intro workshop, I was like, there's no stepping back from this.
Oh, yes. Once you
There's
get,
no stepping back from this because this is a paradigm shift.
yeah,
It was huge for me. There's no blaming the child for not having the skills or the motivation.
yes,
It's our responsibility. So
100% preach to that. Same thought. It makes me think of hope for providers that are doing this kind of approach or might be struggling with kiddos to get them to communicate. And it's not so much the skill issue, it's the will. The motivation isn't there. We haven't been able to contrive it in that environment in a way or capture it to really take advantage of that and maximize it. And I know you had shared with me before, I believe it was called the Hope Profile. And I would love for you to
it
talk.
is. Yeah, I would love to share that with anyone who watches this podcast. So the Hope Profile it's a kind of an elaborate reinforcer or preference like survey and assessment. And so what it does is like it really looks at the unique and uncommon ways that kids are communicating what they like and what they don't like. And it really leads you and the parent through like a look at all kind of different like sensory modalities, like different types of things. And then why I wanted to share it with you, Jamie, is like when we talk together, like we acknowledge like these certain patterns of interest that kids have. And you and I had slightly different names for these different kinds of learners, but we had the same ones. We had kids that were hoarders or collectors. We had kids that like to disassemble rather than assemble things. We had kids who like to line up. We had kids who like to put things in hidey hos. We had these same kids. And what I like about the Hope profile is when I get to that section and I'm interviewing the parent, they're like, how did you know he likes to do this? How did you? It like is
Is there any
validating to them, right? That their child has an interest, a play scheme, right? That is their own, but it's not uncommon among like neurodivergent individuals, right? This is just something we can recognize. And what I like about the Hope profile is that it really teaches you and I guess like kind of my catchphrase is observe with wonderment, that when you have someone who has some unique or uncommon ways of playing, unconventional perhaps ways of playing, that what we want to do is observe them with wonderment and curiosity, not judgment. So if they're standing in front of a window, they're rocking back and forth and they're spitting on the window, we're not figuring out how we're going to block that or change that. What we're looking at is like, what about that particular activity is so elegant to them, is so curious or so like just wonderful that they're going to continue to do that. And then how can I use some kind of sensory matching or something about that situation to create a play chain or a jar, like a joint activity routine surrounding that? So if they like rocking, I've got a rocking board, a rocking chair. I can hold somebody and rock. If they are looking out the window at the birch tree with the leaves that are sparkling. I've got like a pom pom or a ribbon dancer or something that might have some kind of similar sensory component. If they like smearing the saliva on the window, is it like how it looks in the sunlight as they're spitting it? Could I use a spray bottle? Could we use like the texture that of the smearing with like some kind of paint or some other gack or goo or some kind of other sensory activity that I can put into a plate chain that can be socially mediated, that I can use like to help establish like that social situation as being reinforcing and create opportunities for them to communicate with me. So the Hope profile, I hope gives people hope about how they can look at what their child's uniqueness as being wonderful and just their own little expression of themselves. And then how can we harness that? And I think that's the paradigm shift. And not all kids are going to need this kind of careful analysis. Lots of kids have lots of typical toys and activities that they enjoy, and they're not going to need this. But some of my favorite kids, the kids that I feel like are have been the most influential in my life, are the kids that do struggle with that, and how that we can look at this through a different lens and then instead of worrying about functional play, worrying about motivating play and
Yeah.
motivating little activities or routines or play chains. And
Yeah.
then use that as like the springboard. You can elaborate on it later. You can add things to it later. You can make it more and more meaningful. So it starts as spraying water on the picture window, now becomes spraying water on a mirror, and you're putting foam letters up or or foam animals and talking about that, right? Or did you just pull out a plant like
Water in a
spraying
plant.
plants? Yeah, watering plants, right? Or we're spraying outside on the sidewalk on sidewalk chalk and seeing how those images change and then drawing there, right? So it expands into all these other activities if you do it well and you don't kill the reinforcing value of it by trying to make it functional too quickly.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, thanks for like talking about the whole profile. I hope that it's going to be hopeful and helpful to people as they're trying to do this. And really it guides you then to create different like potential
Yeah.
like play chains that you could use. And then of course you have to like test them out
Yeah.
and see
Goals in
and
there
see
that they
what the child's interested in. And like tools like your book with all your activities in it. Dr. Jamie, I just have to say, like, I'm so impressed with you and like your creativity that I know your book is incredible. Mine's on order. I haven't received it yet, but I
love
know it's going to be like a magical, and you should hold it up because this
it.
is something to be so proud of. And it's so beautiful and like well organized. I know you showed me some of it when I was at your house, and I was like, this is going to be so helpful to people. And that you have some similar helps in there for like if your child is this kind of a person, they like these kinds of things. These are the types of activities that they might gravitate towards.
That motivation. Liam was a big inspiration. He is one of the most creative play partners that I have ever met. Or, like you're mentioning, your little friends, the ones that require us to step outside the toy box, if you will, and really be creative and think about different ways to get them to light up. And I love that observe with wonderment and curiosity, because I'm always curious, what about putting things in a pile do you find fun? What about enclosing play schemas, lining things up, positioning? They just fascinate me. And all kids go through play schemas. Ours just kind of gets stuck a little bit along the way. And I just love the name of the hope again. And I love your neuroaffirming language, unique, maybe uncommon, as opposed to different or non-functional. Like some of the words that we hear that just, as a parent, speaking as a parent, that the kind of things that I would ask and answer questions about in a hope to me as a parent, that it kind of signifies to me that all play is okay and that autistic play is authentic play and that there's nothing wrong with
Yes.
a child hobby hopping and jumping around from different activities.
Hobby hopping. Yes, absolutely.
Into
No,
that.
and like really to see a parent's like affect shift
Yeah.
when you're talking about it in this way. Or like when they say, you know what he really likes to do, Tammy, he likes to pull the electrical cords out of the wall and flap them in front of his eyes. And I'm like, great. And they're like, what? And
A
I'm like,
ribbon.
that gives us so many clues, right? What about Mardi Gras beads? Yeah. What about a ribbon dancer? What about sparkly pom pom? What about, lots of other things that we can be thinking about pop tubes that will have some kind of similar quality so that these are clues, not things to be, I mean, obviously that's a safety issue. So you are going to be worried about that to some degree. And I am going to block that, but I'm going to provide then all these other sensory matching alternatives that are available through me.
Yeah.
So that's going to, be so helpful to parents to be able to look at their child with curiosity
Yes, I
with
know.
curiosity
And I think,
and affirming, right? This is okay. Your child is okay. They're their unique individual, and these are the things they're interested in. Let's see how we can use them to give them the greatest opportunities possible, to keep as many doors open as possible towards communication, towards greatest joy in life, towards greatest number of experiences in life. Keep those doors open.
absolutely. And I think that validation for parents is so powerful. It's okay, it's different, it might be unique, but it's not atypical, right? We're not talking about it in those terms, like from the medical lens that we might work under this deficit-based model. But as we're supporting parents and caregivers, are really getting people to think about different ways to play. If we're talking about on our reinforcer preference assessment atypical, we're almost already telling someone don't work on that because it has a negative connotation as opposed to unique. He has a really creative, unique way of playing with his alphabet letters. For me, I'm going to build a jar around that and I'm going to think about how to layer in my learning targets and maximize that motivation. I'm not going to try to put the puzzle in the puzzle. That's not the focus of what I'm trying to do. Is it a data point? Put a puzzle piece in a puzzle? Yeah, sure. But I can think of 12 other things supporting communication that I could also be doing that are going to help that child stay and extend that engagement a little bit longer, which means I have more learning opportunities I can embed and maximize. So I just love the language that you have used in the hope, and I love the name of it, the hope. Gives me hope for professionals. Any resources that you refer, other than the amazing ones that you create that we're going to link, or recommendations for professionals who maybe aren't in a dual role like yourself, who might be a behavior analyst or an OT or a parent caregiver listening, who wants to really understand better how to and bring in all of that amazing speech, articulation, communication that you were doing so eloquently, how to make the worlds kind of collide, where you have the science of teaching and then you have all of that knowledge.
Well, I am a huge proponent of interprofessional collaboration. And I've always thought that whenever I collaborate with anyone, and I experience that with you, I think like the two of us together, we learned so much more about Liam and about our science and our art than we would have alone. And so I'm a huge proponent of that, obviously. And in terms of like NDBIs in particular, I think you're probably better able to guide people. I actually found taking the Early Start Denver model training to be really helpful. Not a lot of it was new information, but what it did was affirm everything I knew as a speech pathologist. The other thing that I've done recently that I think has been actually pretty informative for me is I took the training on the communication complexity scale. And that I have been a big proponent of clusters of indicating responses. And in the field of behavior analysis right now, indicating responses are getting a lot of play, right? People are talking about them. And as often happens, like when we try to operationalize something, sometimes there might be a tendency to go to an extreme on something. So I've been seeing people like teaching, like, we used to teach more as like the main way of indicating what you
Yeah.
wanted. And now people are teaching an isolated point as a method. No, there's nothing wrong with these ways of indicating what you want. But in reality, kids don't develop a single response to indicate what they want. They develop clusters of indicating responses, and they're often topographically
Mhm.
unique to the activity. So if a young child wants to be pushed on a swing, they might rock back and forth in the swing and look at you and go, ah, so they're like giving you three indicators of what they want, and it's absolutely abundantly clear to the parent what they want. So if we replace that with a sign for more, we're actually pushing back some of these other indicators, especially if people are using differential reinforcement and they're not thinking about, oh, I really want to differentially reinforce eye contact plus a point. And I honestly, I've seen this go awry, or I wouldn't be harping on this right now. So what I love about the communication complexity scale is it really talks about like a dyadic and triadic eye gaze. Maybe some of this stuff is a bit complicated when you're applying it as an RBT, but just the idea that we're working towards unique ways of expressing what they want, maybe particular to an activity. So I used to teach signs right almost immediately when kids started declaring their motivation through an indicating response. And now I wait and I shape it a little bit. And you can shape up within a session someone tapping the ground that they want to do up and down with the blanket ride versus them going back and forth that they want to do swinging in a blanket. And you can get eye gaze with it and often a vocalization within a short period of time, where it may have taken me several hundred trials to teach them the sign for swing or the sign for up and down.
Yeah, you
So
overgeneralize it to everything, and now you have to undo that.
that right, and undo that. So like I guess when we're looking at what are the resources that are out there, I'm like, I think that that looking back at any of the NDBIs, because there's always emphasis on really analyzing how are they communicating right now. Let's first reinforce and shape the ways they're currently using before we try to prompt anything else, because shaping is much quicker and more efficient and much more child-led than any kind of direct instruction in that. So that's the first thing that I would say. And then other resources, one of the things that I've tried to do is I don't want people to be reluctant to try to use NDBIs. And because of my experience with multiple exemplar training being so helpful, is that I tried to create some tools through Bridgify that that show that. So there's like multiple examples of how you can introduce a play chain. It shows you coaching a parent through it. And I made a little mnemonic. So if someone was not familiar with the concept of jars yet, but they're understanding that they want to be child-led, they want to follow the child's lead, they want to create a play chain. Play chains are so simple, just a couple of elements, right? And these are common in all the NDBIs. That's what Francesca Di Spinoza like demonstrated so elegantly. It's just about creating a sequence, and there has to be at least three steps. There has to be a reinforcing element that, and there has to be some social mediation, right? And maybe not choose something that if you interrupt it, the child will get upset, right? So that's all you have to know to create a play chain. And then once you have that going, like the mnemonic interact is what I've used to try to teach people like what they need to be thinking about. And it's so simple, and you can use it as your integrity check. It's I initiate. Did I initiate with something the child already is reinforcing to the child, or did I watch to see what they initiated and then build on that? Did I notice that's the N, notice what's the most reinforcing aspect of this? And then did I try to make it more reinforcing by my presence?
Yeah.
And then E, did I echo or imitate anything they said or did during that interaction? And if they didn't do or say much, did I model something for them? R, did I reinforce their subtle indicating responses and shape those? A, did I add some kind of interesting element to it or novelty? C, did I layer communication on top of their intentions and wishes during that? And part of the communication piece for me, and you heard me doing this, was I often chant or sing a little song that matches the reinforcing word, the words that later would become man's, right, for that activity. And then the last T is timing. Did I time my delay or my addition of novelty right before the most reinforcing element of the activity? So we get this huge boost in MO. So now we have someone who, through that little time delay, which is really just a little extinction, right? Now they produce a better form of a word, more indicating responses, eye contact plus their reach, right? A vocalization, right? So that just understanding a play chain and using interact, I think you can actually do quite a bit of good. And that's what some of the tools do. They just introduce that, talk it through, give you an example. It's just that simple, like little videos that are 8 minutes. You could show it to a parent during your session, during your family treatment guidance session. You could show it to a BT, like, just prior to their session, and help them understand how to do this more elaborately. But what do you think are the best resources? What do you think helped you become as skilled as you are? I'm curious, and this is something I think everyone should know because you're really the queen of the NDBI,
I wish. I love
or
that.
one of them.
I love that. I really feel like verbal behavior, that was a big kind of eye opener for me into the natural environment training kind of thought and demand and following the MO. That was a big kind of skill that was cascading downwards for me and thinking about things in a different way before I really got into NDBIs. And then also leaning into Early Start Denver Model, Project Impact PRT. What are the things that are going to get me the most engagement? One of the things that I love about ESTM is that focus on social attention, social motivation, a lot of Jerry Dawson's work. That just blew the paradigm wide open. And it just made sense to always be curious about the motivation and where their spotlight of attention was shining. How do I step into it? How do I get them into mine? And really supporting that back and forth dyadic engagement. And then I read a lot. I have a lot of books behind me, and they're not all ABA type books: child development, speech, communication, skirts, right? Things that might not fall under the ABA realm of so much evidence based, like you mentioned, but there's still value in them in terms of learning from them, taking that information, and then making it work for me in my practice. Like some things I love, some things I think, not for me. But it's always just like you talk about curiosity. I just have a curiosity to learn and try to help these children maximize their engagement. And for me, it's you got to reach before you teach. It's the motivation connection piece that has to come before we get into all of the other things that we're trying to teach. So, journal articles are great, but I think what you're doing is so innovative. You're taking a very complex procedural teaching type of system, but you're packaging it in a way that people can get their hands on it, digest it, and implement it accurately with the tools that you are creating for them, which is so needed and so missing. We can all go to a webinar or a training and leave and just have that void of, what do I do now? Or what did she say? But you are actually creating tools that are going to make such a big difference that people can get in their hands, tangible, put in a session, and refer back to rinse and repeat as needed to keep with that fidelity and integrity.
Oh, I love that. I also love reach before you teach, and I think this applies to our BCBAs and speech pathologists too. And by that I mean like they need to reach for the book on the shelf and look at it, or reach for the webinar, or reach for the resource, but they also need to actually do it.
Yes.
Like I think there's a lot of BCBAs who haven't had a lot of time playing
Yes.
because of like the how we've like a lot of BCBAs, right? We've had huge growth in our field. And and depending on who your supervisor was and their attitude towards play and their experience with play, you might not have had a lot of experience understanding what typical play looks like, that filling and dumping is a completely normal play scheme. And, like all of these things that we know because of the books behind me and behind you. And so what I really think is one of the like perceived barriers is like they haven't had the boots on the ground experience playing with kids. So play with kids during your supervision session. Talk about what went well and what didn't, and what you were trying to accomplish. If something goes well, step out, have the RBT step in. Use BST to teach a play chain, to teach a jar, right? And don't be afraid of that. Don't be afraid to use an integrity check about just the main components and like operationalizing the goals. I mean, obviously, the Early Start has their own way of operationalizing goals and all of that. But you can use even very simple modifications of your traditional goals from central reach or whatever, and use indicating response instead of a mand, and count them, tally them, look at clusters. You can easily modify a goal to do that. And I actually have created like goal banks for central reach so that people had access to those. So to make it that much easier for them to implement this. So I think, especially in our assent-informed treatment world, where we are required to have the motivation of the child in place for our teaching, these things are critical. They're really critical. And Vince, from the day I met him, a willing learner was one of his main goals. Partington, Sundberg, all those, the McGreevy, all those early greats, right, that are still going to be at the VB conference, that are still like talking about this work, right? They knew that. They got it. And
Yeah.
so you bringing up verbal behavior as one of the most important critical factors, the application of Skinner's analysis of verbal behavior and the role of motivation in learning, absolutely critical
Yeah.
to individuals who haven't maybe had that kind of exposure. I'm surprised when people like say they don't know who Vince Carbone was.
I
But
know.
I mean,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
again, in the last 5 years, Vince has been working at his Dubai clinic, and he's semi-retired, so he's not going around the country like he did.
And then,
Nor are those big kinds of 3-day workshops as popular as they were because of virtual trainings. And
yeah.
so
I'm going to put some
I
links.
didn't mean to get off track. I just agree with you.
It's all background talk. Oh my God, this has
Verbal
been so much.
behavior, just get in there and do it. Figure out what, use your skills as a behavior analyst to figure out what went well, what didn't. Use things like the Hope Profile or the Raise D, whatever you need in order to like really do a good reinforcer assessment on kids that are struggling with reinforcers. And if your child's not learning, if their rate of progress is flatlining, then I'm going to say like probably 50% of the kids that were referred to me in the past for like lack of progress, it was all about reinforcers and social motivation.
Love it. I feel the same way. I feel like what you talked about, stay curious, be curious, and observe with wonderment is such a powerful message to end on for people to be curious, look for that connection in any way that that child brings it to you and lean into it and let the learning happen from there. I think that's
Yeah,
fantastic.
and the learning is not just for them, it's for us too. And we can carry it to our next client.
And we do. Oh my God, this has been amazing, Tamara. Thank you
Thank
so
you so much. This was great, Jamie. I love talking with you. You inspire so many, and
much.
people should definitely join your group. What is it? How do they do that
Uh,
again?
the NDBI Essentials membership. Yes, I'll put a link on it. They just go to the website, click on the link, and it will show them all about the incredible resources and videos and everything that you're working on creating. Same thing hanging out over here in the NDBI arena to really give them actionable advice and practical tools. Like take it and do it. That's my big passion project right now. So, yeah,
That's awesome. Awesome. And CasperEnterprises.net, also offer a lot of free videos and tools there. So people are welcome to go there and download those, look at those as well. So thank you so much for this time together. It's amazing.
I'm great. Thanks, Tamara.